Hello and welcome to another episode of the Science on the Edge podcast series. I'm Dr. Mark Darcy, and in today's episode we're gonna go at things from a different slant. My usual format is to give a sort of lecture on a particular topic of interest, so memory, consciousness, cancer, nutrition, that kind of thing. But today's episode is going to be totally different from that. So we're going to be talking about religion, and we're going to be talking about atheism. Now, I should put my cards on the table right at the beginning. I am an atheist, but I'm going to try to be as unbiased as possible during this podcast episode. To help with that, a little while ago, I put a tweet out. By the way, for any of you guys that don't follow me on Twitter, my hashtag is @MarkOfTheD. That is at MarkOfthe. So I posted a tweet out that read as follows: call out to both the religious and non-religious. My next Science on the Edge podcast episode will have a different format. I would like you to tweet your reasons for being religious or your secular reasoning. I will then read out your tweets and discuss them in my next episode. So that's the tweet that I put out, and I got quite a large response. So I'm going to read some of those tweets. Not all of the tweets, but some of them are kind of unreadable, but many of them really do speak a lot of sense. I'm going to try to be as unbiased as I can whilst reading these tweets too. So some of the tweets will be pro-religion, pro-God, and some will be very secular. I will go through, I'll try to go through them in roughly equal measure, as much as I can based on the tweets that I did receive, that is, of course. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. So, I have Twitter in front of me right now, and I have a few key tweets listed. So, first response that I received was from the Communal Atheist, at Communal Atheist. You can guess which side of the fence this particular person is going to be on. She writes as follows. I remember reading Sands of Time by Sidney Sheldon. In that, a devout nun, while getting raped by soldiers, keeps praying to her saviour to rescue her, and nothing happens. I thought a lot. It was scary initially, but eventually concluded that there's no evidence of God. Not scared now. That's quite clean, that's quite sharp, and to the point. I think that says it all. I suppose it's quite a common experience with people. They read about something terrible that's happened in the world, or see it on the TV, or experience something terrible themselves, and think to themselves, well, if there is a God, why is this allowed to happen? You know, why are the children getting cancer? Why are there earthquakes and hurricanes and that seem to affect the devout just as much as they affect non-believers? It's a common idea, a common meme that I hear out there on Twitter and in the world generally. If there is a God, why does he let bad things happen? Many religious people do have an answer for that. They say God has some greater plan that we are just too stupid to realize, and we should just accept that there is a bigger plan and all the suffering as a reason. I've never bought that myself, personally. It just seems that if there is a God, suffering does not negate the idea of a God, of course. But to me, if there is a God and he allows suffering, then it doesn't seem like a very nice God to me. But that's my personal opinion. Let's read some more tweets. Okay, so here's another one from a video at PLOUNT_OS. I'm atheist for the same reason I tie my shoelaces. I don't like to stumble in my reasoning. Again, another quite clean, sharp quote there. Right to the point. Can't really argue with that reasoning. Well, you can, and many people did. So let's carry on with that. I'd like to, because I've got quite a lot of tweets here from the religious. I want to throw in, from the non-religious. I'd like to throw in some of the tweets that I received from the religious as well, just for balance. So the Keymaker at JD Morrison 71 placed a little image up on Twitter with a quote. The image is basically a huge, the ocean. It's the ocean, and in the ocean there is a goldfish within a small bowl, and there is a fish swimming in the sea next to it. The text above the fish bowl says religion, and the text above the fish that's swimming in the open sea reads spirituality. I understand that point. Basically what the Keymaker is trying to say here, at least this is my interpretation of it, is that religion is a very closed, kind of restricted idea of the universe, whereas spirituality is more freeing, more open, more general, not quite so restricted. I get that. Of course, religion, spirituality, those two terms are very hard to tie down. I mean, religion is easier to tie down. Religion as dogma, religion as all of its precepts written in various holy books. Spirituality, however, is a personal venture. Everyone has a different slant on spirituality. It's a personal thing. Meditating is a spiritual process, for example. So is yoga. A person can have a spiritual experience, rock climbing or swimming. So spirituality and religion, very different things, I would say. However, many people do link spirituality with religion. They say that spirituality implies there is a God. I don't personally. I meditate. I meditate regularly. And I've had some very spiritual experiences whilst meditating, but I don't link those spiritual experiences with a God, with some sort of creator of the universe. But that's my personal slant on spirituality. Everyone has a different one. Spirituality is a very vague and very general concept, but I get what the Keymaker is saying in that quote. Here is a tweet from Dr. Maha Elias at MAHAELIAS1. Religion is not rational. Religion is harmful. Very simple, very clean. And I would expect nothing less from a doctor. She's cut to the point, and she's basically voiced what I kind of think regarding religion. I don't believe religion is totally rational, and I do believe it is harmful. But I know that many people get great solace from their faith, and they believe that religion has done a lot of good in the world. There's no arguing with the fact that many churches collect for charities. Admittedly, many of those charities are church charities that basically spend the money on the churches themselves, but there are many other religious charities that collect money and use it to feed the poor, and to put towards disaster relief all over the world. So religion does do a lot of good in the world. I also think it does a lot of harm, and let's face it, a lot of the charitable endeavours of religion, they will give money to various people around the world and various good causes, but there tends to be the precept with that people need to believe in God to accept the money, or they need to be part of some religious organisation. Not always, but that is something that a lot of churches do stipulate. The money that they give will be given, but it will be given to the faithful. Not always, but in many cases. And let's not forget, of course, that there are many secular organisations that collect money, lots of secular charities, that distribute that money to good causes without any religion linked to the giving. So, for example, in Scandinavia, the Scandinavians are some of the largest donators to charity in the world. They give a huge amount of money to charity, far more than in the US, for example. But the Scandinavians are secular nations. pretty much all. They have the lowest level of religiosity in the world. Something like 90% of people in some Scandinavian nations say that they do not believe in God, whereas in countries such as the US, the majority do believe in God. Yet, in Scandinavia, they give more money to charity. So, people that say that religion is good because it helps good causes, it collects money and uses that money to save lives and to help people. Well, yes, religion does do that. But let's not forget that secular organizations do exactly the same thing. And people that are secular still give to charity. I give to charity. I'm an atheist. I do give to charity. So, again, religion does do some good when it comes to giving to charity and to helping good causes, but secular organizations do the same thing. Okay, moving on. Friends Drone, at Friends, FRENZDRONE, he says the following: extreme deep time versus our very short existence, extreme vastness of the universe versus tiny earth, extreme cruelties, punishments, and diseases versus loving God. God's cosmic plan. For God so loved the world, he spent 13.8 billion years watching shit getting smashed and shuffled, tinkering with life, overseeing countless mass extinctions, unspeakable struggle and pain, until man came up instead of simply poofing him into existence, because why not? Okay, that's kind of a bit of a poetic tweet there. I'm not quite sure how to take it. I think Friends is basically saying that that he's an atheist, or he's unclear about religion, although it's not 100% sure if that's what he's saying, but I would say that he's leaning in that direction. Bobbied 100 at BOBBIED 100. Reason for my abandonment of any church: my experience has shown that religions want three things. 1, your money. 2, your free will. And most of all, 3, your children. Okay, I'd like to say quite a bit about that, but I am trying to be balanced in this particular podcast episode. But there's no doubt that Bobby makes some good points, that religious organizations do collect a lot of money. Look at the Catholic Church, one of the richest organizations in the world. They do take free will. All religions do this, from Islam to Christianity. They basically state in their books a set of truths. They say, this is how it is, do not question it, do not come up with your own ideas. And throughout history, religion has persecuted people that have ideas that are not listed in the various holy books. So free will is something that is curtailed by religion, in my opinion. As for the third point, your children, well, I suppose many religious organizations and religions themselves, they do start to affect a child's beliefs, thought processes from a very early age. There is no doubting that. I myself went to a Catholic school. I was brought up a Roman Catholic, and religion was everywhere when I was a child. It really was everywhere. At the school that I went to, we attended masses, we went to church, there was a chapel in the school. At 7, we spent several months preparing, this is all the children, we spent several months preparing for our first Holy Confession and our first Holy Communion, and then we were wedded to God. All of the boys had to wear little bow ties and suits and attend the church. All the girls wore these white dresses with veils and also attended the church, and we all had our first Holy Communion. We were brainwashed, there is no two ways about it, at the Catholic school. And I know the same thing happens in all faith schools. In Islamic faith schools, the children are taught the Quran from a very early age. They are taught are told to memorize it, to quote it. religious schools do tend to indoctrinate their children from a very early age. There is no doubting that. Many people out there may have gone to secular schools or Protestant schools where perhaps the religious indoctrination is not quite so strong. But for those people, I would just like to say that in religious schools, and I speak from experience, indoctrination is really quite powerful in these institutions, and many people come out of these schools religious. I did not. I rejected religion at quite an early age, but and an exception does not necessarily prove or disprove the rule. Okay, next we've got Tony Hopkinson at Tony J. Hopkinson. Why am I secular? 1. Talk to some religious people who don't give the God concept a bad name. 2. Talk to far more who do. Okay. Next, Reasonable Brit at Reasonable Brit. Atheist here, born in the UK, raised as a Christian, and remained that way for almost 40 years. Had I been born in India, I would probably have been Hindu. They can't both be right. Follow that train of thought. Interesting. I think what I'm going to do now is jump to a direct message that I received. This DM is from one of my followers who does believe in God, James Plaskett at James Plaskett. He wrote quite a long message to me, and I'm just going to read it. I'm just going to read it to you. See what you think. It's quite in depth. And very pro-religion. So, what made you realize that there exists a totally different realm from the existing physical one? 2 answers. Last followed through a combination of things. 45 or so brief experiences of a divine compassion, each lasting no more than a few seconds, and each when I was asleep. Those direct experiences of the divine constitute at least 95% of my acceptance of a different realm from the physical one. Reports by other people of similar experiences. Reports by others of near-death experiences and out-of-the-body experiences. The existence of the occult classics. The Society for Psychical Research was set up in London in 1882 and sent out an investigator called Hodgson to check out Madame Blavatsky. Blavatsky had set up the Theosophical Society in Madras, India, and claimed to be receiving spiritual truths from masters of the ancient wisdom, which she wrote up into books such as Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine. After over a month, Hodgson filed his report that those realities were unsupported by evidence and Blavatsky was a fraud. But he added that he could not for the life of him see what the point of the fraud could be. Rudolf Steiner, 1860 to 1925, Alice Bailey and Annie Besant and others, active from 1875, have made similar fantastic claims about communion with spiritual beings. Although none of it is proven, their writings are there. Their very existence poses the same question that troubled Mr. Hodgson. What could be the point of so gigantic a con? The good old-fashioned philosophical argument from design, the fine-tuning of the universe's physical constants, the inadequacies of a neo-Darwinian theory of evolution in accounting for the development of speciation, and also the absence of any explanation for how life itself arose in the first place. That was the first part of his DM. I'd like to comment on that before reading the next part. Yes, there are some very good points there. I agree. The first point I'd like to discuss is James's point regarding why do so many people claim to have had these spiritual experiences or to have communed with some other plane of existence if it's not real, if there is no other plane of existence, if there is no God. I can straight away think of a few reasons for that. First of all, money. Many of these spiritualists make quite a lot of money by convincing people that they are communing with the other side, with the with the realm beyond the veil, so to speak. There is money to be made from that, there's no doubt about it. Many spiritualists pack auditoriums, they charge for people to attend, they sell books. So there is certainly reasons why people may make these claims. The second point, let me just get back to that. Where was it again? Oh yes, the absence of any explanation for how life itself arose in the first place. Well, this is sort of my area in a way. I am a cell and molecular biologist. There are explanations for how life arose in the first place. I have had a few discussions with James in the past, so I want to be as fair to him as I can. James does not believe the explanations that I provide regarding how how life may have originated. There is the RNA theory of the origin of life. There's a theory involving thermal vents and crevices in the rock that could have acted as early cells. There are a number of ideas regarding how life could have arose from a pre-life state. I mean, basically, as soon as some sort of molecule possesses the ability to make copies of itself, evolution can take place, natural selection can take place, and you can end up with a planet full of life. I'm not going to spend any time in this podcast going through the details of how life can arise from inanimate matter, but suffice it to say, there are a number of highly respected theories. You could do a search for these yourself on the internet regarding how life itself got started, and there's some evidence for them. We've even created some of the building blocks of life in the laboratory. We've basically taken mixtures of the sorts of substances that were present on the early Earth. We've basically subjected them to the sorts of temperatures, the sorts of atmospheric conditions that were also present in the early Earth, and we've seen molecules arise spontaneously that are precursors of self-replicating life. We've seen it happen in the lab. I'm not going to go into any details of that in this podcast, though, and perhaps I'll release a podcast about that in the future. So I should say that James does not buy those arguments. He does not buy those arguments. I do. So we will have to agree to disagree regarding that. But suffice it to say that a number of scientists have put together very, very convincing arguments for how the first self-replicating molecules may have arisen on this planet. And once they do arise, natural selection kicks in. Okay, so moving on, I'm just going to continue with James's DM here. So the above answer, this is relating to the answer I just read out, was an answer I gave to a question posed earlier that week at Quora, asking me what made me aware of another world beyond the physical. I've listed 8 separate reasons, but I began by saying that 95% of my acceptance of something more lies in the 45 or so brief experiences of divine compassion, always when I was asleep, always causing me to waken, always no more than a few seconds in length. Since I cannot even reproduce those on demand for myself, I quite understand that others either deny them, shrug at them, dismiss them as no more than brain farts, great term that, or say extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence, and with that last attitude I emphatically agree. I could say more regarding the attitude of Dr. Eileen Barker to such experiences also. Okay, well that's very balanced of James, actually. He basically is speaking from experience, from his own subjective experience. He basically has had these spiritual divine moments, and he realizes that we cannot be sure that he's had these experiences. He just says that he has, and therefore we don't have to believe him. I've had spiritual experiences myself, again, like James, whilst asleep and whilst meditating. I have had these experiences. I think the difference between myself and James, however, is that I do not link these experiences to the divine. I link them to my brain chemistry. Our brains are capable of feeling joy, of feeling fear, of feeling happiness, contentment, all sorts of other emotions. And these emotions can be triggered randomly just by the brain firing whilst asleep, whilst awake, whilst meditating, whilst looking at a sunset. I personally don't believe that having such a profound, deep, meaningful spiritual experience, however, implies the existence of a God. I just do not associate such experiences with a God. James does. I simply do not. I simply do not. These experiences, they can be induced by drugs, for example. When I was an undergraduate many years ago, I had some experiences with drugs. I took MDMA, ecstasy, a number of times, and had some profound experiences whilst on it. I felt a connection with the people around me. I felt a bonding with the world, with the universe. Everything felt connected. Everything felt real. Everything felt like it had a purpose and that joy was everywhere. I realized that experience was caused by a drug. I know the chemistry of it. MDMA causes a huge release of the neurotransmitter serotonin into the synapses of the brain, and this neurotransmitter stimulates exactly the feelings I've just described. Perhaps James had a similar release of serotonin whilst asleep. I don't know. None of us can know. James can't know. I can't know. But I just want to say that these experiences can be felt without there being a God. That's my personal opinion anyway. Okay, so moving on to James's final part. This is quite long, but I feel it warrants I feel that it's a good thing to read out James's DMs because they are quite detailed, and the tweets, obviously, due to the size, are less detailed. Okay, so back to James. So this is James again. To say more about the spiritual experiences and what they ought to lead us to conclude, I have already touched upon this in my book, Coincidences, and my blog. I was immediately struck by the superiority of yoga over religion, for here an act of investigation into the questions that are of most interest was possible. I also like the personal nature of the investigation, something reinforced by the title of this, the first book that I came across on the subject, Teach Yourself Yoga. But I started to ask myself just how successful my attempts had been. It was true that I had had a handful of experiences, always while sleeping, of glorious compassion and sensitivity. The first of these was in June 1986. They clinched that the full range of human consciousness is way beyond the estimations of mainstream psychology, and also supported the idea that attempts to know more about the soul may bear fruit. Indeed, it may well be that this is far more common than is popularly supposed. When researching her 1984 book, The Making of a Moonie, Eileen Barker presented a questionnaire to members of the Unification Church and also to a control group. It contained one question that had been asked of 100 postgraduate students by David Hay. Have you ever had any religious or mystical experiences? So I was the percentage that said they had, often with accompanying comments like, no, I've not told anyone, for the simple reason that there's such a lot of disbelievers about, and they'd ridicule you, like that she felt that the emphasis in psychology was put on the wrong factors. I do not therefore want to suggest that Moonies are unique or freakish because they will very probably have had some kind of religious experience. I do, however, want to point out that they find themselves in an environment in which they, and indeed others, believe that such experiences are uncommon and that those who have them can be considered slightly or very nutty. Reading through the responses of both Moonies and the control group, I began to feel that had Freud been studying present-day students in Britain rather than 19th century matrons in Vienna, he might have concluded that it was spiritual rather than sexual repression which lay at the root of many current frustrations. It is, after all, often quite acceptable for a student to tell his friends whom he slept with the previous night. He is far less likely to tell them that a lady appeared while he was saying his prayers. As the 21st century dawns, reductionism and neo-Darwinism rules, so such spiritual experience gets hushed up. Okay, I'm going to briefly comment on some of James's points there. Yes, he's right. We are in more of a secular society than we used to be, so people that do have religious experiences may be more likely to be quiet about them than they used to be. However, are we in such a secular society? I mean, yes, in Britain we are quite secular, and in Northern Europe we are very secular, but in the US, not so much. The US has a very high amount of religiosity. There is a high amount of religion in Southern Europe, around the Mediterranean as well, and throughout Africa, and throughout the Middle East. There's a lot of religion still out there. So I'm not sure we're quite as secular as James is making out. There is a fear of ridicule, however, I suppose, if people openly admit that they have had an experience. They maybe fear that they will be accused of being insane, of having delusions of some kind. Actually, speaking of delusions, I will briefly sort of discuss this, actually. I wasn't going to, but I think I will. What is the line between religiosity, between visions, between spirituality, and between insanity? It's a difficult line to place, isn't it? I mean, if someone has a vision in a church, describes seeing Mary, or Jesus, or whatever, they might be viewed to simply be very spiritual, to be very religious, especially by the religious community. However, if someone has a vision of something else, not Jesus, not a religious figure, and it's not in a church, they are immediately assumed to be having a psychotic episode. They may be institutionalized. They may be placed on medication. So, a religious person having a vision, that is a spiritual individual who is in touch with something beyond this world. Non-religious person having a vision, he's insane. That seems to be the general consensus out there. So, I don't know, seeing something, hearing something that isn't there. Yes, that could be evidence of an afterlife, of a god, of religion being real. Or it could be a psychotic episode. It could be a misfiring of neurons in the brain. It could be a release of neurotransmitters. It could be a result of stress or anxiety. It's hard to know. In fact, it's impossible to know for sure, because these experiences are so subjective. So, enough said about that. Moving on, I'm going to go back to the tweets now. So, back to an atheist. So this is Mr. E. Mann at Not Buying This BS. I'm secular atheist because I wanted God to be true. There had to be a common thread of truth woven into all of the religions throughout recorded history. What I found was the evolutionary basis for belief as a survival mechanism and behavioral social adaptation. Makes sense. Tony Hopkinson, again. I firmly believe some, if not most people, need to believe in something external to them. Given that, it would be stupidly counterproductive to attempt to try and take it away. So all we can do is guide it more productively. So Tony Hopkinson earlier stated basically that he is secular, that he is an atheist, but he's posing an argument here that perhaps we shouldn't try to suppress religion. We shouldn't try to discourage it. We should just try to direct it. Okay, so this is a valid point, actually. This is a valid point. If religion is so dominant in the world, then should secularists just let it be? Let it be. Not try to suppress it, not try to challenge the religious, just to let it be. That point has a lot of merit to it. It really does. If people are going to be religious anyway, then what's the point in confronting these people? Okay, I have a view on this myself. My view is this. Religion has a lot of power. in a lot of nations on this planet. Yes, not quite so much now in countries like the UK, and certainly not in the Scandinavian nations. The power is diminishing somewhat, although it is still present. But in huge parts of the world, all of Africa, all of the Middle East, the USA, huge parts of the world, religion holds a huge amount of power. It controls politics. It controls who becomes the leader of the nation, what people can do, what people can't do, women's rights, abortion rights, stem cell research, all of these things. Religion has a say in them in many countries, and and usually its say is negative. It retards scientific progress. It retards human rights, in my opinion. So the reason I challenge religion, the reason I push atheism and secular viewpoints on Twitter and elsewhere is just because I think religion has so much power. If religion was a personal thing, if there were no churches, no mosques, no temples, religion was just something people did at home by themselves, in the privacy of their own home, the privacy of their own head, it had no influence on politics, I'd be totally happy with religion. So what? Be religious. I don't care. But it doesn't. There are faith schools. There are religious institutions, huge multi-billion pound or multi-billion dollar religious institutions that have huge amounts of power in the world, and they use that power to push their own agendas, and those agendas negatively impact humanity in many ways. For example, well, two examples. Stem cell research. Under the presidency of George W. Bush, government funding was stopped for embryonic stem cell research. So for 8 years, stopped in the US. That retarded progress in that discipline by a huge amount. We may now already have not artificial hearts, but lab-grown hearts that we could donate to people for transplants, and livers and kidneys and all the rest of it. We may already have all sorts of medical interventions based on stem cells, and millions of lives could be being saved right now using these technologies if, for religious reasons, George W. Bush had not stopped stem cell research funding in the US. So there are real effects. And he did this because a advisor of his, a religious advisor, said that the moment of fertilization, when the egg and the sperm fuse, is when the soul enters the embryo. And therefore, to destroy such single cells, such blastocysts even, is to destroy a life, to destroy a soul. That was his reasoning. That's why the stem cell research was stopped in the US. So religion has a real impact in the world. Another example, in Africa. In Africa, there is an HIV epidemic. Some countries have up to 4% of the population infected with HIV. Millions of people die every year of HIV in Africa. Yet at the same time, the Catholic Church says that contraception is wrong. It is ungodly. It is against doctrine and dogma. And this is preached in many African nations by preachers that are highly respected by the public. And as a result, contraception use is quite low in African nations. And HIV is high. We know that using contraception, using the right type of contraception, lowers the risk of contracting HIV. Yet for religious reasons, people are not using contraception in many countries. So religion, in my opinion, or at least organized religion, needs to be confronted. Because if it's not confronted, these sorts of doctrines become prevalent in societies, and they have real consequences in the lives of real people. Okay, so moving on, but I do get Tony's point here. I mean, his point isn't that we shouldn't be against religion. He's basically saying that we should try and guide it more productively, and I get that point. We can guide religion. We can nudge it in one direction or another. The Enlightenment, I suppose, nudged religion further away from its pure dogmatic form in the West to slightly more towards the secular end. But but not fair enough in my opinion, but that's my opinion. Okay, so there were a couple of responses to Tony's tweet. One is from Maxwell Graham at maxgraham5800. I don't really care that much what people believe in until it starts impacting on the lives of others, whether it is pushing for legislation based on religious beliefs or actual physical harm to innocent children. If they would keep it to themselves. Tony responds to that tweet. If by keeping it to themselves you mean them not compelling others to share it, or to build from it, that's pretty much secularism in my view. Maxwell agrees. Yep, secularism. So moving on. Ian Considine at Ian Considine. I was brought up as a casual Catholic and went through Catholic schools from 5 to 16. I eventually went to university and read theology. It was the deeper understanding of the religious text that led me from being agnostic to atheist. Okay, so some similarities with my upbringing there. I went to Catholic schools. I was brought up religious. I did not go to university and study theology, though. I studied cell and molecular biology, and I pretty much became an atheist at school. Actually, I'll maybe mention a little bit about that now. So yes, I was brought up religious, brought up Roman Catholic, went to Catholic schools, First Holy Communion, First Holy Confession. I also have had a very religious father, etc., etc. What moved me away from religion was basically just reading. So at about, I don't know, about 11 or so, 11 years old, 10 or 11, I started reading a lot of books on spirituality. I knew quite a lot about Christianity. I knew the Bible quite well, but I picked up on a few books at the library relating to things such as reincarnation, Buddhism, ghosts, astral projection, poltergeists, telepathy, all of this sort of stuff, all of the New Age stuff, and even things like the Bermuda Triangle. And I read books on all of that stuff at 11, and I bought it all for a while. I thought, whoa, maybe Christianity has got it wrong. Maybe it's more complicated than the Bible. Maybe there's reincarnation. Maybe there are ghosts. Maybe there are all these other things. And for a year or two, I kind of went from being, I suppose, a member of an organized religion, Christianity, to being a sort of New Age spiritualist, let's say. But it didn't last. I kept reading those books, and I saw many contradictions in them, even at such an early age. And then I got into science. I started reading books by Richard Dawkins and others, and I started to disbelieve the spiritual ideas that I had believed briefly for a year or two. And I didn't go back to religion. I didn't go back to Christianity. I just went away from religion and spirituality in that sense of the term and moved towards science. And I've kind of been a rationalist and a scientist ever since, from probably the age of 12 or 13. And don't get me wrong, this is not me hating God, or hating the idea of religion, hating the idea of there being an afterlife. I would love all of that to be true. I would love there to be a God. I would love, actually, I'd like reincarnation as an idea. That sounds like a quite logical idea. Be good in one life, get rewarded by a better life next time. Be bad in one life, get punished, have a worse life next time. There's a nice karma, a nice circle to that, which is probably why I believed it for a little while at 11. But the thing is, wanting to believe something doesn't make it true. And the more I read these books, the experiments that were performed in parapsychology, etc., etc., the more I realized that it just wasn't true, that at least there wasn't any evidence, any proper evidence for any of it. Most of the parapsychological experiments had flaws, they weren't double-blind, etc., etc., non-reproducible. I just didn't buy it, so I moved towards science. And I right now believe that there is not an afterlife. There is not a God. If I am proved wrong, it will be the greatest scientific insight I've ever come across. If some evidence comes along that there is a God, there is an afterlife, then yes, I'll believe it. If there is valid scientific evidence for that, I just don't see it happening. Okay, that's just a little bit of a brief outline of how I got to my how I arrived at my secular way of thinking. Now back to the tweets. Okay, so. Nabila AKH, so at NABEELA AKH. I grew up in a religious family, but I was a questioner as far back as I recall. So I respect others who are religious, as long as they do no harm in its name or otherwise. But it never made sense to me, though there are some nice sentiments within. Sentiments, yes, there are some very nice sentiments, and I don't want to deny that. There are lots of good sentiments in the religious doctrines. For example, the Golden Rule in Christianity. Basically, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, do unto others as you would have done unto you. All of that sort of sentiment rings true with me. Yes, we should not harm others. We should not do things to others that we would not want done to ourselves. A brilliant, brilliant sentiment. I should say that it was not Jesus who came up with that sentiment. There are similar quotes from older religions and older texts that predate Christianity, but yes, good sentiments. There are many good sentiments in the religious books. If you look through any religious book, you will find some really wondrous lines, some beautiful quotes, some beautiful poetry that hits home. I'm not denying that. But you will also find some quite hideous quotes and some quite terrible sentiments in these religious texts. I'm not going to list them. That isn't the purpose of this tweet, but as a counterpoint to the turn the other cheek quotation from Christianity, look in the Old Testament. An eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Kind of contradicts the New Testament in a way. And there are many other really quite nasty quotes in the Old Testament. And I'm picking on the Old Testament because the Old Testament is shared between Christianity, between Islam, and between Judaism. It's a basis for all three religions, and there are some very, very vile quotes in those books. It is, you're supposed to stone someone for working on the Sabbath. Moses ordered exactly that to be done to one of his tribe when they were found collecting sticks on the Sabbath. He was stoned to death. That is the sort of quote that you see in the Old Testament. Cities were razed to the ground because they didn't believe in the right God. Women were enslaved and men were butchered. Lots of bad things were said in the Old Testament. Now, I'm going to say straight away that many Christians particularly say, but that was the Old Testament. The New Testament wiped all of that away. If that's true, then this is a question to the Christians. Why do you not cut out the Old Testament from your Bible? Remove it if it's nonsense. And if it is nonsense, remove it. But is the New Testament totally true? Is it really? There are some nasty things said in the New Testament too. It's not just the Old Testament. The book of Revelations for a start. Okay, but I'm on a pulpit now, and the purpose of this podcast episode is not for me to just preach atheism. I want to give both sides their say, which is why I ask people to tweet in the first place. Okay, I want to scroll down now. Let's see if I can find a few pro-religion tweets. Okay, so let's see. Just give me a moment. So here is one from Alephros at OSYMANDUS. Having spent around a decade studying esoteric and occult practices, I find some of the methods and structures to be of benefit to meditation, calming and understanding yourself. Any conversations with deities, I suspect, are just my own psyche. I get that. A lot of the practices of religion are very, very beneficial. They do aid with things like meditation. I mean, what is praying really? It's meditating in a way. It's the same sort of precept. When I meditate, I focus on my breathing, or I focus on a sound or something like that, and I try to clear my mind. When people pray, they focus on an idea, on a wish, on a god, and that can be very relaxing. And I suspect that many people that pray really reach a similar state of mind to that of a meditator, especially people that pray for huge amounts of their day, such as monks and nuns. There is a lot of overlap between the practices of meditation and things such as praying or worshipping, and I can see benefits in those practices. Yes, I agree with Alephros on that one. This is from Steve at Stevie Nookes, STEVIENOOKZ. Not me, but my mum found acceptance and comfort in Christianity. It gave her definition. I think she was a better person because of it. Towards the end of her life, she finally found a church where faith was promoted over religion. Vicar was an ex-con. She felt at home there. I understand that sentiment. Many people find comfort in religion. And when I talk about atheism or religion on Twitter, many people say to me, why do you want to take away someone's comfort, someone's belief? Many people, millions and millions of people, perhaps even billions, find comfort through their faith. And who am I to take that comfort away? Well, I'm a scientist, I suppose. And as a scientist, I seek the truth. If millions of people found solace and comfort in life by believing in leprechauns or fairies or anything else mythical, I would be happy that they're happy, but I would still be inclined to point out that there are not any leprechauns, there are no fairies around. It would just be the logical thing to do. I would have to show them, I would have to ask them to prove to me that these leprechauns or these fairies existed. It would be up to them to prove such things, and if they offered no evidence, I would have to say, I'm sorry, but I believe you are wrong. These things do not exist. And the thing is, it's more than that. Comfort is a great thing, and many religious people find comfort in their faith, and that is great, but religion reaches beyond the individual. When religious ideas are thrust upon the non-religious, when religious societies persecute non-believers or believers in a different god, or homosexuals or women or whatever, I have a problem with that. And many in the West seem to think that religion is this harmless, quiet, personal thing that just benefits the individual and does no harm. And in many Western countries, that's true. Religion has lost its teeth. It has no power, but unfortunately, in many parts of the world, it has very sharp teeth and claws, and it exercises its power mercilessly. That's my problem with it. But I understand what Steve is saying. Many individuals find comfort from religion. I think they would find the same comfort from some sort of spirituality or spiritual practice, such as meditation, that does not have a dogma or a holy book attached to it. But that's my opinion. Here is one from Ross Baglin at ROSS_BAGLIN. She's written 3 tweets here, so I'll go through all 3. We live in a physical world and a conscious world. The former is about evidence and experiment. Consciousness is about meaningful narrative, emotion, and moral judgment. Dostoevsky expressed it best. If there is no God, anything is morally possible. I am intellectually Christian, not because I see God in physics, though you can see that, but because I see Christianity as great moral fable which orders our consciousness of love, suffering, sacrifice, forgiveness, and redemption. Life is essentially tragic, and we need those things. Twitter is not the place to cover the topic, but religion also carries for me a connection with history, beauty, a sense of the timeless, and of humility. Humans are a very arrogant species, and at their best when they retain a sense of personal frailty and sinfulness. Okay, I see what Ross is saying here. She sees a beauty in nature, a beauty in reality, a beauty in thought and spirituality, and links that with a God. And this is her faith. This is her faith. And this is a harmless variety of faith, in my opinion, as it stands. It's a form of faith that is very personal. Once again, not everyone's faith is personal, though. Many people's faith affects other individuals, and even the Christian faith can do that at times, through indoctrinating children at faith schools, for example. Okay, so moving on. So here we've got at Crotal Love, Crotaluslove. I was fortunate to have been raised without religion. My grandfather was an engineer and loved astronomy, trains, planes, nature, and me. He taught me much. Happy I was never indoctrinated. Oh, and my grandma loved Carl Sagan. I had it good. I suppose he did, really. He was brought up in a secular environment. I wasn't. I was brought up in a very religious environment. Some people do move from secularism to religion. Some move from religion to secularism. It can happen both ways. Here's John Harrison at Prof. John H. Profjohn H. As a physicist, I am not interested in a belief system. Either something is true or it isn't. In science, we look for evidence and base conclusions off the evidence procured. We know something is true because it can be observed and tested. With religion, it is the opposite. Considering a lack of evidence for the existence of a god or gods, I have no other choice than to assume the absence of said deity or deities. Pretty much my opinion there, actually, which is no surprise. We are both scientists. Here we have, replying to John's tweet, we have Ovin Politic, at Ovinepolitic. Plenty of evidence. Trees, grass, physicists, sheep, mathematical, natural law, you name it. Thing is that it's not just pointing in one direction. So Ovin basically takes what we see around us, sees nature and physics even, and takes that as evidence for a deity. I don't know. I mean, I see his points. There is something rather than nothing. There is a universe. There are trees. There are plants. There are butterflies. There is life. And many people think it must have come from somewhere. There must have been a creator, and that creator must have been a god. A god that made all of this. Otherwise, why is it here? This is a common argument that people push towards me on Twitter and in the real world, from Christianity, from Islam, from all faiths. If there isn't a God, then why are we here? Why is there a universe? Why is there a planet? Why are there all of these things? Why is there consciousness? It's a good question. Why is there a universe? I don't know the answer to that. Nobody knows the answer to that. Every year, scientists get closer to finding an answer. We're edging closer. We used to think that the Earth was flat and the center of the universe. We now know better. We know about stars. We know how they're formed. We know where disease originates from. In the holy books, religion is thought to be caused by demons. Sorry, not religion. Disease is thought to be caused by demons. We now know about viruses and bacteria, etc. Scientists keep pushing back the boundaries of knowledge. We learn more and more about the nature of the universe, the nature of life. Viruses, atoms, the Big Bang, the formation of stars, the place of the Earth at the periphery of the universe, not at the center. All these things were not predicted in the holy books. None of them. None of them are present in the holy books. It was scientists who discovered all of these truths. And I think we'll discover why the universe exists too. How it formed in the first place. Why there is something from nothing. There are already some ideas. Sean Carroll, a physicist over in the US, has come up with some quite interesting ideas. He has a good podcast, by the way. That's Sean Carroll. But we're not there yet. No, we don't have an answer as to why there is something rather than nothing. Not a proper, provable answer. But just because we don't have an answer does not mean we have to insert God into the gap. We will find the answer, and we are edging closer. Will Rutter, at PALAEOWILLR. I was brought up Catholic. However, my sexuality became an issue, and when I realised that just being me wasn't good enough, I came to the conclusion I was better off without it. Religion has caused more wars than science, and I don't want to be associated with it. I should counter that point in a way. Whenever I say myself on Twitter that religion has caused so many wars, so many deaths, some religious person will always come back to me and say, yes, but what about Nazi Germany and what about communist Russia? They have caused so much death, and they were atheist regimes. Millions and millions of people killed under the rule of these atheist dictatorships. So I do get that quite a lot, and I have an answer, and I will provide that answer to you. First of all, Nazi Germany was not an atheist regime. It really wasn't. In Mein Kampf, Adolf Hitler's autobiography, he states quite clearly that he is a Catholic, he is religious. He mentions God over and over again, and he mentions God many, many times in his speeches. Perhaps Nazi Germany wasn't a traditional Christian society, but it certainly had lots and lots of religion built into its very fibre and structure. As for communist societies, they have killed millions. Millions and millions of people have died in China and in Russia under these atheistic regimes. But were these people killed in the name of atheism? Were people found guilty of believing in a God and murdered for it? Or, and this is my slant on this, were they found guilty of believing in the wrong God? In a Christian God, in a Muslim God, rather than in the correct God, the socialist God. In Christianity, in communist states, let's take the Stalinist state for a start, as a good example. Stalin was brought up as an Orthodox Christian. He went to a seminary and was trained to be a priest. He used that knowledge to control his people. Basically, the Christian doctrine was replaced by the communist doctrine. Communism has all the hallmarks of a religion. Unquestioning belief in the state, in communism. Worship of a leader, whether it's Stalin or Mao. Persecution of unbelievers. All of this, even communist science arose. Certain scientific ideas became dominant under Stalinism. Scientific ideas that had no basis in science, so there was even a communist science. in my opinion, and I know it's kind of cutting hers a little bit, splitting hers, but I personally believe that communism is a religion in all the same ways that Christianity or Islam is a religion. The only difference is no afterlife is preached. But in all other ways, it is a religion. So these people killed in the name of communism were killed in the name of a religion. Some might say, what about secularism? What about humanism? What about atheism? Aren't they religions too, by your definition? No, they're not. They're not. True atheism is simply a lack of belief. That's all it is. It's a lack of belief. There's no doctrine or dogma associated with it. There's no holy book of atheism. Atheists simply do not believe in a God. We see no evidence for it. That doesn't make atheism the same as religion. It's not that we have a belief in atheism, that we follow a dogma, that we have rules and laws we have to live by. No, we simply don't believe in God. We simply don't believe in God. Okay, so moving on. Let's see. Here is quite a long series of tweets by Tom Mason. That's at Tom A. Mason, M-A-S-O-N. I have a few reasons which work together as a foundation of my faith. Firstly, I was raised a Catholic, but I turned away aged 13, studied physics at university, and came to the conclusion the existence of a God was fundamentally unprovable one way or the other. I realized science is a tool to investigate and describe repeatable phenomena, and that any direct actions of a God would appear as acausal events, and as such, unless the event was undeniable, science by its nature cannot evaluate it. God cannot be made a mouse in a maze. Conversely, any repeatable reaction of God would appear as a law of nature. So God cannot be revealed by science unless he wants to be revealed in an undeniable way. If God exists and does not want to be revealed generally, for whatever reason, we could not unmask him. Consider the simulation argument. It is possible that we live in a simulated universe. Perhaps it's even probable under some assumptions. An operator of such a simulation could appear to the Sims to be de facto God. He could pause, modify, interfere with his Sims at will. If a sim game-playing God could exist and be beyond our ability to reveal, even if he interfered without his will, then so could a real God. Both would be supernatural to the occupants of the universes. As to reasons why I believe, 1, I look at history. People die for things they believe to be true, but I can't think of times when people died for things they knew to be a lie. If Jesus was raised, then his disciples, who claimed to be witnesses, lied, knew it, and died for it. To me, that does not make sense. Further, this utterly crazy claim from a small bunch of mostly poorly educated fishermen and outcasts had reached across Europe by word of mouth within a lifetime, and then exploded despite persecution from the start. 2, I also have my personal experiences of encounters with Jesus. I remember being frustrated by my inability to work out whether God existed, but was suddenly aware of his presence. I took a leap of faith and the angst fell away. I was filled with joy in a way which people noticed. My family said my face was different. The burdens were lifted from me and I discovered forgiveness and freedom. I changed in a day and I cannot deny it. The frustration has gone, and it was if I could suddenly see how everything fitted together. 3, I experienced healing. I had always supinate, sorry, I'm just reading the tweet as it is, and that led to discomfort in walking and painful knees and ankles. One day I was distressed by my singleness, but this is what he's written. But God spoke to me and promised all would be well. As I walked home, I noticed I was walking differently. My supination had suddenly gone. Now I see what he's saying. And when I later went for new running shoes, I was examined in slow motion and given neutral shoes. 4, My wife and I were giving up hope of being able to have children when we met the vicar who had married us with his wife and family. Incidentally, he was a former high-energy laser physicist who gave it up to be a vicar. Later that evening, his wife sent us a text message. "Hi Tom, we just had a funny conversation after seeing you and Rachel this evening." Kiss, kiss, kiss. 11-year-old said she had a thought that you were having a baby. "Also, I had a dream last week that you are having a baby." Andy said he also had thought you were going to tell him you are having a baby. "We think this was a word of knowledge from God, or are we just a bit mad?" This was obviously a risky message to send someone, but we didn't think we were pregnant, and my wife wasn't yet late for her period. However, we went home and took a test, which came out positive. A friend later told us that she thought God had told her we would have a girl, which we did. Now, individually, all these things can be dismissed or argued against, but for me, they hold together to give me a faith which is unshakable. Lastly, an observation. I find it incredible that the universe has evolved within it a creature capable of reasoning about it, who experiences consciousness and free will. Why? For what purpose? Maybe it's just an emergent property, a side effect. Perhaps it's an inevitable part of complex life, but it's still mind-boggling. Of course, the mind recoils at the idea that our consciousness will just vanish like the wind when we die, or that our experience of free will is just an illusion, for free will be real. It must change the direction of the universe, and would then in part have to exist somewhere outside of it, just as an external force must act of a body to move it. These are not arguments, of course, but they make existential angst a thing of the past. So that was quite a long one there from Tom, and very rationally put. Those arguments make a lot of sense. I should say that regarding the story that he mentioned about the baby and about the recovery from the running injury, obviously they can be picked apart, which he does admit. Coincidences happen. They happen all the time. Someone wins the lottery every day. They pick the right numbers. Law of averages state that someone will always win the lottery, and someone will pray and be miraculously healed. People go to Lourdes every year. Thousands and thousands of people. Most of them are not cured of their disease. A handful do. A handful of people are cured. They do recover from their disease. This has been documented and shown as evidence that miracles really do happen in Lourdes. But when you consider the huge number of people that visit Lourdes every year, some of them were always going to spontaneously get better. They just were. That's the law of numbers, the law of averages. It's statistics. Pure and simple. But Tom makes some very, very good points there. He makes some very good points, and I particularly like his idea of the simulation hypotheses. If this entire universe is a simulation, then whoever is running that simulation is a de facto god. And if we would consider that person to be a de facto god, then surely if this world was created in some way, the world that we live in, by some other power, then it's no different than in the simulation. He is the de facto god. There is some logic to that, but I don't know. To me, it's sort of... It's more of an argument for... Okay, so a similar argument I heard. If the Earth is flat and it's resting on the back of a giant turtle, then what is the turtle resting on? And the answer could be another turtle. But what's that resting on? Another turtle. Another turtle. It's turtles all the way down. And that's kind of the argument that Tom is inadvertently making here. If it turns out that there is a God that created this universe is a sort of simulation, and the God is really the person who created the simulation, then who created that God's universe, that God's simulation? Then who created his and his and his and his and his? It's turtles all the way down. No, it's not satisfying. It's just not satisfying. There needs to be some reason, some purpose, some structure, some formula, some logical argument that cannot be argued against. We don't have that argument yet, but I don't think turtles all the way down is a good argument, personally. With all due respect to Tom, most of what he said there was very, very articulate, and I respect his personal experience, and I do see that faith has given him a lot of joy in life, made him a better person. Perhaps meditation would have done the same thing. Perhaps taking up the correct hobby or a change of profession would have done the same thing. We can all have profound experiences. We can have profound experiences staring at a rainbow, reading a novel, listening to music. In Tom's case, it was faith. As for the healing of his leg, perhaps faith helped that. Perhaps his injury was psychosomatic in the first place. Perhaps it was stress. Perhaps it was anxiety. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps not. Perhaps it was a genuine injury, and it was genuinely repaired through his faith in an all-powerful God that actually exists. That is possible. I don't believe that, but I respect that he believes it. Chrissy Grech. Her handle is at Chrissie, ChrissieGrech. Plain and simple. All she says is, I'm a pantheist. And a reply to that from Grussa Max, at Grussa Max, Grussamax. Me too, Chrissy. Okay, well, pantheist, that's one opinion some people have. Here we have Darren Coombs, at D_M_COOMBES. Religious is too narrow a term, confining to cultural norms depending on where you are born, a form of social cohesion twisted to man's end away from true spiritual belief. He also says spirituality, the soul, the feel of something out there, of something inside, of something more, something innate, something you can't touch or see, yet you know to be true. Belief or faith is something intimate and yet candid and beyond simple definition. Very poetic, Darren. And I do like the sound of that, and it defines quite well how I feel when I'm meditating, or when I'm listening to music that profoundly touches me. It doesn't need a God associated with it, I think, but this is it. I think the problem here a little bit is this kind of division between religion and spiritualism. We kind of know what religion is. Spiritualism, though, is many different things to different people. Some people view spiritualism as touching God, as touching a deeper reality beyond this world, which to me sounds like religion. But other people, when they use the term spiritual, they're really referring to just a connectedness, a calmness, a sort of happiness or joy that comes from certain activities such as meditation or such as music. So I don't know, I think it's too general a term, spiritual, to really use in relation to religion. It needs a better definition, in my opinion. Okay, so let's see what Tani has to say. That's at TANNIE66364346. That's a long one. When I studied mythologies, I realized that all people think that their religion is the only true one, and I figured that they could not all be true, but they could all be wrong. Once you start thinking this way, it's easy to see the flaws in religions. John Elliott, at John_Elliott. I like to think about this a lot. Okay, that's all he said. I was thinking there was going to be a reply on that one. Let's move on. Okay, so we have a couple of tweets here from Emma Jeffries at EMMA_JEFFREYS3. I was raised Christian, but stopped going to church in my early teens. For me, I think the main thing was learning about ancient Greek and Roman gods at school, and realizing that the fact that I was a Christian was purely a function of the place in time and space where I had been born. She has a second tweet here. We'd have a discussion and laugh about how ridiculous some of the ancient Greek and Roman myths were, but I realised that the stories in the Bible, the resurrection, water into wine, bread and fish, etc., really weren't that different. It's a very good point, Emma. Silvana at SILVANAVIS. I'm not religious, because if there was a God, it would show up occasionally to tell us which religion is right. God doesn't seem to care about religious people and doesn't care about non-religious people either, but somehow that makes more sense. Silvana continues, also, why would anybody create us and then create thousands of diseases to kill us? It really doesn't make any sense. But then allegedly this is the same God who sent his son to die for us and then blamed us for being wicked. I could go on and on. Katie Cox, at KT4UT. I'm an atheist. Probably from a young age, as religion was not part of my upbringing, except at school when I'd pretend to be paying attention. To my mind, the question is, what sort of being makes humans in order for them to die and then live with it? Very odd. That's a good point. That kind of goes back to one of the points I made at the very beginning. Basically, why create life? Why create humanity and then inflict so much suffering on us? Some Christians would say that it was all down to original sin. Adam and Eve, the apple of knowledge, etc. We were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and everything else is paying a price for that sin. But I don't really agree with that as a punishment. I mean, should the parents' crime, should the results of the parents' crime be inflicted on the child? Should the child have to suffer for the parents' crime? And if not, then why should we have to suffer for something that a distant ancestor did? I just disagree with that. Okay, so let's see. What else have we got here? At Cure the Cause, raised in very strict Catholic tradition from birth, my father died suddenly when I was 16, and with it my brainwashing. Have since read most of the different faiths' main books and found as much wisdom in Star Wars. Actually, Star Wars is quite a good example. I love the idea of the Force. Now that would be a good religion. And some people actually do believe that as a religion. They're actual genuine followers of the Jedi religion. But it isn't true. And if it isn't true, and the reasons that I think it isn't true are really the same reasons I believe that Christianity and Islam are not true, then moving on. At BALLYGAN 1971, I was raised Protestant, but after 21 years of Catholics and Protestants killing each other, and then another 6 years of Muslims and Jews killing each other, I had seen the light, and now I detest all religion. Rory O'Brien at RoryOB99. Yes, this person doesn't want to comment. So he's basically saying that, okay, I'll read his tweet. It would be biased of me if I didn't read his tweet. He basically says, no thanks. After all your tweets blurring out your atheism and rubbishing any alternative views, it would be a pointless exercise in masochism. I will keep my belief structure quietly to myself. Well, it is true. I have produced a few tweets which do say some bad things about religion, which is part of the reason I decided to put this podcast together. I hope I am giving both sides of the argument in this podcast. I'm reading out tweets generated by my followers, some of whom are religious, some of whom are atheists or secular. And I'm basically letting the tweets speak for themselves, let's just say. And yes, I'm offering some of my opinions. It's obvious that I'm an atheist, and I make no apologies for that. But I'm also trying to show both sides of the argument as presented by my followers. Okay, so let's see. I have at IDK12326. I find arguments that a God exists too abstract and distant from reality. At Hurry Scotsman 2. I love some of these names. Atheist, existentialist. was made to stand in a cupboard at primary school for saying I believed in evolution. There being no God makes us responsible for each other. I respect others' rights to beliefs. I've had productive and inclusive conversations with people of many faiths. Okay, so it's a good attitude. And I kind of hold that attitude. Yes, I will say bad things about organised religion, and I do quite often. But I'm arguing against the religion, not the believers. I don't like religion. I believe it to be mythology, and I believe it harms the planet, but I have nothing against the individual followers. Most people believe in a God because they were brought up to believe in that God in whatever society they were born into. So it's not their fault. They simply just don't know any better in many cases. I know some people decide to believe in a God. They come to that decision themselves as they grow up. That's a different class of religious, I would say, But for the people that are basically brainwashed into religion from being a child, I've got nothing against those people. It's not their fault. It really is not. It's the religion, the religions that I'm against, not the individual followers. Okay, so at CGI Alexis, converted to Church of England when moved from French secular school to English. Thought it was the norm. A large argument between different religions and nations about religion raised some questions, so I looked into it. Started my reconversion to atheist at 12 years old, but took decades to understand it all. Okay, I've just took a quick scan of the next tweet. I've not read the whole thing, so let's see this together. At MOOGIWADA. Ancient aliens. Is Jesus an alien? Was the beginning of my escaping the Matrix. I was a 3-year Mormon convert from Baptist when I was having questions. The leaders said I shouldn't ask. After that episode aired on the TV, I questioned everything and did history research. Now I am free. Okay. Next, okay, what have we got here? At Sven_SATIONAL70. I was never indoctrinated into any religion as a child and grew up as an outsider viewing all religions with the same skepticism. None of them seemed like they had any idea about or were overly concerned with the truth. I've grown to see religion as a poison in our society. Next, we have a at Declan_Travers. Raised as an Irish Catholic, I was taught early to respect others and be peaceful. These were the only lessons I took from religion. We don't need a God. We need to learn to be good towards each other and not try to exploit others around us. Education fails on this today, in my honest opinion. I'm at Barbara91240545. I'm a Buddhist and chant for about an hour daily. The chanting clarifies my thoughts and makes me feel happier. Not sure what the chanting does to my brain. Perhaps increases serotonin. Not sure I believe in reincarnation, but makes me feel happier. There's a response to this by at BillReagan16. There is much research into the benefits of chanting meditation, so do keep it up. Caveat, meditation can be a trap because for some people it becomes about repression of emotions rather than working with them. At Corsten MC Pickle. I do love these names. My religious side. Chanting, singing, meditation is stress relief and enjoyable. Good excuses for festivities, food, drink, sex. Shared stories provide a framework for discussion of complex issues. It's free. I suppose that's the original intent of religion, really. Just stories, fables, ideas that people would share around the campfire to try and make us all behave well towards each other and to unify the tribe. I think it just got a bit out of hand when religion became too dominant in a society and when organized structures such as churches, temples, etc., began to dominate societies. Okay. One word answer from Tim at SHANDAZAR. Evidence. Very succinct. Very, very succinct. At Hella Handbasket, I read the Bible to reinforce my beliefs. I was startled at what I found was and wasn't in the Bible, and I began to question everything I had been told growing up. I didn't want to become an atheist, but I couldn't lie to myself. It was the unavoidable conclusion. At Mac Wolfie, having achieved a degree in religious studies, then postgrad, and teaching religious education for 12 years as an academic subject, I found it easier to adopt a non-religious stance to avoid bias. I continued that stance, still find the subject fascinating and the moral dilemmas intriguing. Religion is fascinating, there's no doubt about it. When you read the religious texts, be it Islam, be it Judaism, be it Christianity, or Buddhism for that matter, the texts are intriguing. There's so much depth, so much complexity. They are fascinating. So is the Iliad for that matter. But it does not make such stories true, in my opinion. But they are well written in many cases, very well written with some fascinating characters. Okay, so at Glyn Bailey, I don't feel any need for certainty based on a belief in the supernatural. Therefore, I am an atheist. At Pavlova Forbrecki, I am religious because I experience a genuine sense of inspiration, community, and wholeness when I join with others in worship and spirituality-led action, and believe this is worth nurturing and celebrating. I don't subscribe to man-on-a-cloud type beliefs. This is someone else, and I get the feeling that a lot of people have this idea that religion to them is not necessarily a belief in an actual God, but more a belief in community, and that's true. There are many communities that find solace, that find bonding and interconnectedness through the media of religion. Church groups bring people together. There's no denying it, and the same is true with groups that are brought together by mosques and temple and all the rest of it, be it in Hinduism, in Islam, in Buddhism, whatever. This sense of community that you gain from believing in the same faith can be very powerful and can help to bond people strongly together. So yes, I do see a point in that. And one of the things that people say to me quite regularly is if we get rid of religion, if religion disappears, the sense of community will go with it. And they even go further to say that that's already happened. And as religion leaves society, so society begins to break apart, and we have less and less bonds with each other. And yes, I suppose that is partially true. Religion did help to hold communities together, and we haven't yet worked out how to hold those communities together in quite the same way without religion. But I think that's because religion has been around for so very long, and it's only recently that it started to die away in certain nations, particularly in Northern Europe, for example. And we haven't quite figured out how to replace it, but I think we can have a sense of community and a sense of togetherness without religion. There are ways to do that. We need to work on those methods and how to kind of hold a secular community together, but I don't think that's impossible. I think it's perfectly doable with the right practices and the right structure in a society. Okay, so let's see, moving on. At Ian Leon Mallet, as long as you don't take it literally, I think polytheism can be pretty cool. Adds a bit of drama to things that would otherwise often be overlooked, like rivers and the moon and stuff. I replied to that from at Tess Humphreys. I always think that polytheism makes way more sense than the idea there's just one all-powerful being. Yeah, not many people have really discussed polytheism in this thread, but yes, I suppose that polytheism is still quite strong in certain parts of the world. I mean, basically, Hinduism is a polytheist religion, and there's 1 billion Hindus on this planet. And for many millennia, polytheism was everywhere. That was the default. Every culture had multiple gods. A god for the moon, a god for the water, a god for the storms, the mountains, etc. And there is a certain connectedness about that type of religion. If everything in the world around you has its own god, its own personality, its own aura, I can imagine how that would make the world have a certain meaning that I suppose wasn't present before science, before the scientific method was created. So yes, I can see benefits in polytheism. Doesn't make it true, but I do see benefits in it. Okay, so at Kim Widden. Separation of church and state must be absolute. Freedom of religion depends on it. Furthermore, religion should be used to better yourself. Believing your religion gives you the right to pass judgment on other people's life choices is conceited bullshit. Well, I agree, Kim. It is conceited bullshit to push your religion on someone else, but that doesn't stop people doing it. All the major faiths do exactly that. There are over 70 countries in the world where it is a crime to be an atheist. And I can't remember how many it is now, but it's something like 8 of those countries provide the death penalty for apostasy. So you know, it's a good sentiment saying that the religious should not push their beliefs and sentiments on others, but all of the holy books preach exactly that. The Bible says that if you are not of the correct faith, you are simply wrong and you will burn in hell. And the doctrines of Islam do the same thing. They believe that Islam is the one true faith and everyone else is simply wrong, and there are punishments to be met out to non-believers and apostates. I suppose this once again goes back to my original argument when I was basically saying that religion, if it's a personal matter, if it's just something you believe on your own in the privacy of your own head and your own home, then it's relatively harmless. It's when it becomes organised that it becomes properly dangerous and insidious, in my opinion. Okay, let's move on. I have to admit I do have more tweets from atheists and people with a secular viewpoint than ones from the religious, which is why I did spend a bit of time at the beginning of this podcast giving voice to the more religious people just to try and balance things out. Okay, so at Stodius1, I've always been atheist. There was no religious element to my upbringing at home or school. I've never been subject to any religious indoctrination. I've always looked to the sciences, physical, social, literature and art to make sense of life, world, universe and my place within it. Neil Shirtcliffe, at N_SHIRTCLIFFE. A couple of tweets from Neil. My daughter came home at age 8 and asked whether God is like Santa and the Tooth Fairy. Personally, I lost patience with religion when whatever you accepted, there was another more difficult thing to accept, another difficult proposal to accept. A good believer reasoned with me that God set the starting condition. Set the starting condition. Then I encountered those that had to take it to intelligent design and total determinism, and it was over for me. Admittedly, I was sceptical beforehand. Fair point. Louis Uksoff, at LOUISUKSOV. As explained before, religion is primarily born out of fear of death. Life after death is comforting. There is also a need of common identity, greedily exploited by the elite to enforce power and to enrich themselves. There's no doubt about it. Many people have become powerful and become leaders of nations based on their faith. I don't mean that God helped them to become leaders. I mean that they have pushed faith as a means of control. There is no doubt about that. At God Here 3, was brought up a Methodist stroke spiritualist. Atheist was a slow growth in maturity and observation and living with scientists. I wish there was another life, but we only get one, and it's a shame how we humans use it. So I'm a member of at humanists_UK. I also have Up on Politics. Not sure what he means there, but he does have a second tweet. That gave up on politics. Okay, that explains the first tweet. Too many selfish rich gits running things. But I consider spirituality being in the natural world. Compassionate humans and loving those moments that hit the chemical neuron firing experiences. I think that's the crux of it. If you put someone into a brain scanner, you measure neural activity, and have them meditate or pray or any such activity, you do see a change in the activity of brain waves and levels of neurotransmitters, which does go some way to explaining the inner feelings that are generated from being religious. This actually links a little bit with some work that was done by a scientist called Persinger over in Wellington, I believe it was, in Wellington in Canada. What Persinger did was he created this gadget which was generally referred to as the God helmet. It was a device that you could place on your head, and it would interfere with electrical signaling in parts of the brain around the temporal lobe. When people were subjected to this device, some interesting things happened. A sizable proportion of people that wore the device had what can only be described as a spiritual or highly religious experience. They described feeling connected to the world around them, to feel bigger than their body, to feel to even in some cases feel a presence in the room with them where there was no presence. Basically, the sorts of feelings and sensations that are often described by prophets in all the holy books and by extremely devout religious people. So there are biological components to religiosity, there's no doubt about it. There is even the idea that Muhammad suffered from a temporal lobe epilepsy. The way his visions are described in the Quran do seem to hint at epileptic seizures of the temporal lobe. The auras, the visions, all of the rest of it. I'm not saying that Muhammad did suffer from epilepsy, but if he did, and it was temporal lobe epilepsy, the same part of the brain that Persinger's device interferes with, it could explain a lot of the visions that he had. Okay, so at DIMOZZ1, quite a lot of people seem to feel that there is something else, even if they don't want to put a name to it. I think different religions try to express this in different ways. Many people are put off by how religious institutions have abused that feeling people have for their own ends. I would add to this, though, that many organized religions do a good job of helping other people because they see it as their duty. Doesn't matter if it's winter night shelter, food banks, or community meals. I totally agree. There are a number of religious institutions, the Salvation Army being one, that go out of their way to help the poor and the needy and the disabled, etc., etc. And they do some great, great work. These are good people. But there is the question, would these good people still be doing good things, even if they didn't believe in God? I know good people that help out with charity, that volunteer, that donate to charity, that have no faith in any God or supernatural entity. I don't think you need to be religious to be a good person. But there is no doubt that there are some religious institutions that have done a lot of good for charity, do a lot of work for charity, that help a lot of people. Of course, a lot of these institutions in the past have done a lot of harm. The missionaries that were sent out to various parts of the world back in the days of empire did a lot of harm. They are responsible for so many deaths and so much suffering. So I suppose it's pros and cons on that one. Jim Parkin, at PARKINJIM. 1. Any deity seems superfluous to explain anything now. The god of the gaps keeps getting smaller. What particular group of supernatural entities should one pick? 2. Any religious book I've read has multiple unbelievable assertions. Why believe the rest of the book? These assertions would make sense to a Bronze Age pastoralist, but not now, pretending its metaphor is a cop-out. 3. Final. For example, the Bible makes more sense if you assume the world is flat. The flood could work then, and the devil taking Jesus up high to show him all the kingdoms of the world also works in a literal sense. That's a fair point, Jim, and very well made. And to be honest, things like the biblical flood, if they are taken literally, as they are by many Christians, doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, the entire planet was flooded and was repopulated by only the 2 of each species that a person could fit on one very, very, very necessarily large boat. It just makes no sense. It does not make any sense at all. For example, the meat-eating animals would eat the vegetarians, the herbivorous animals. And what about the freshwater fish versus the saltwater fish? If the world was flooded, they would all be in one ocean. There would be no freshwater fish anymore. Not to mention various other obvious flaws, such as if the Ark was one boat built in the Middle East a few thousand years ago, and all 2 of each animal on the planet worked their way to that boat so that they could be saved. How did the animals get across the various oceans? How did the kangaroos get from Australia across the oceans to the Middle East? There are no explanations for this, and it's because it's unlikely to have happened, in my opinion. Okay, so moving on, let's read a few tweets here by Christoroth. That's at CHRYSTAROTH. First of all, my journey has run the gamut of everything from religion versus spirituality, theism, atheism, agnosticism, and gnosis. I have a pantheistic attitude to the cosmos. My spirituality has always been most deeply rooted in a sense of awe, love of, and sense of connection to nature. 2, story, myth, and creativity, a sense of the sanctity of nature, of life, are an important part of what I consider my spirituality. I no longer have a particular religion, unless Druidry could be called that. We don't tend to see it as such. I'm equally of a scientific mindset. 3, I was raised Catholic and later explored many religions, still in a theistic mindset, but drawn more to the divine feminine, the goddess Gaia, who is the soul of nature. I am now inclined to be less theistic and more pantheistic. That is to see the qualities and mysteries that humans ascribe to God as being part of the reality of the cosmos, of existence, of being and life itself. And there is a sense of reverence, connection, and sacredness in that relationship to the larger whole of which we are a part. He goes on. I just feel an incredible sense of something like religious feeling when I consider the vastness of the cosmos and our infinitesimal part in it, but also realise that we are ourselves the cosmos, becoming conscious of itself. That is, in a sense, very much like mystical feeling. In religion, mystics are those that look for a sense of union, oneness, and deep connection with the divine. I'm happy to use that language, but by the divine I mean nature, life, existence, the cosmos. The language to me is now metaphorical and mythic. His final comment: I think that a sense of wonder or reverence, a sense of the sanctity of life, are a form of mature spirituality, as distinct from superstition and infantile forms of religion. And atheists and scientists can have that spiritual sense of questioning wonder too. I kind of agree with you there, and your journey sounds a little bit similar to mine. I started off in a religious mindset and moved through various forms of spirituality, and I've sort of rested in a scientific mindset, but one with a spiritual feel. I do believe that the way we think, the way we view the world is amenable. By that I basically mean that we can produce feelings through techniques such as meditation or yoga, other techniques as well, that allow us to feel and experience consciousness in a different way than we do on a day-to-day basis. I don't mean that we suddenly come in contact with God or some supernatural entity. I just mean that we change the way that we perceive the universe, and that can be done, and that is a good thing, and it can cause huge enlightenment to develop within us. We can gain huge insights and awarenesses which are just not present without at least attempting something like meditation or taking various drugs, or even listening to music if it hits the right spot in the brain, jingles the right synapses. So that isn't religion, though, in my opinion. That is spirituality in its purest form. Spirituality without any supernatural baggage attached to it. And that's where I am. And I think maybe Christoph, you're sort of there too, or at least not too far away from my perspective. Okay, so moving on. Joe Anderson Tang at Wacky Joe 69. I was baptized Catholic at birth and was relatively devout even after I came out at age 22. Usual trauma of trying to reconcile my religion's teachings on homosexuality and being true to myself. The struggle didn't last too long. At the end of the day, I knew I was a good person. Joel continues. Then I slowly became agnostic, but seeing how many Christians were so homophobic, I felt repulsed by their twisted beliefs. I became atheist after hearing some Christians say that the tragedies, the evil that happened in the world was God giving women a choice in their actions. Well, okay, that's actually not an uncommon story. Many people lose faith when they find out that they're homosexual, and that's, well, pretty much every religion is very much against homosexuality. Even when you hear Christians say that they're okay with it, or you hear Muslims say that they're okay with it, that's not what it says in their books. It really is not. So I can understand why it's hard to reconcile someone's natural urges with those faiths. David Chalmers at David Chalmers 7. How religious I am is open to debate, but I would say such religious beliefs as I have come from my readings of the Sermon on the Mount. It's as divinely inspired any human work I've ever come across. That and summer camp when I was a kid. I did actually reply to David on this one, so I'll read my reply and his counter-response. My reply was, it was also plagiarized from previous works, but yet was inspiring nonetheless. It's a shame that most fundamental Christians do ignore those teachings. David responds, I'm aware how some of the teachings can be found in Plato, better to suffer than to do ill, but beyond that, I've never heard specified from which sources parts might have been plagiarized or which inspired it. A more positive way of stating the same. Well, yes, I mean, that's a fair point. But a lot of these ideas, do unto others only as you would have done unto you, and let he who is without sin cast the first stone, and all of those great phrases, blessed are the peacemakers, etc. They can all be traced back to other religions. I think humans are not as bad or as nasty or as evil as many people think. Throughout history, we've done some atrocious, nasty things to each other and to the planet around us, but we've also, throughout history, had some good ideas and done some amazing things. We've treated each other well, we have been kind, we have cared for the weak, etc., etc., which is why such ideas have been around for so long. And one of the big mistakes that Christians particularly make is believing that all of these good ideas about being nice to each other came from one man, Jesus. They didn't. They've been around for a long, long time. They really, really have. Okay, so Robin McBurney at RobinJFM, CBURNIE. First, faith in religion. Religions are political, based on power and wealth. I dislike them intensely for that reason. Faith is personal belief. Thousands of gods over millennia. I've no problem with that so long as it stays that way. Personally, I'm humanistic, not a humanist. Good point. Humanism is a very good idea. I mean, I move between humanism and, well, I suppose humanism and atheism really are just different parts of the same thing. But yes, humanism and humanistic, two different terms with some overlapping values, I think. Judy Webb, I have never believed in God. I was brought up in a Church of England household and was obliged to attend church and Sunday school. The latter, I suspect, to get me and a younger sister out of the house on a Sunday morning when Mum and Dad wanted some time to themselves. Slightly envy the religious, the comfort and security that faith can bring, but cannot believe in any kind of deity. Science to me is far more convincing as a means of making sense of life, the universe, and everything. But it is up to each of us individually or collectively to give life meaning. Well, I suppose whichever way we look at it, that's what we do. Whether we're religious or not, it's our own beliefs, our own ideas that give life meaning. To some people, life is meaningless without a God, without religion. And some of the religious people that have that concept, they can't understand how the non-religious can even get out of bed in the morning without believing in a God. Well, we can. We create our own meanings in life. Humans always have. Every animal does. My reasons for getting out of bed in the morning are varied. There are all sorts of reasons, all sorts of things I want to do, accomplishments I want to make, feelings I want to experience, books I want to read, music I want to listen to. I don't need religion to give life meaning. But I understand that some people do, and some people find it very hard to cope without religion. They feel isolated, they feel lonely, they feel purposeless. And religion, I suppose, gives such people a reason to get up in the morning. I think there are other reasons we can get up in the morning. We don't need religion, but perhaps some people need it at least to one degree or another. I don't know if that's some sort of neurological condition or genetics, upbringing, but there's no doubt that some people seem to really, really need religion, which is perhaps why such people tend to be so against the non-religious, because we're challenging their own reasons for getting out of bed in the morning. Because if we're right, the atheists, then the religious people are wrong, and that's just too much for some minds to cope with. Here's quite a fun one, and John Marriage at ASTIR0412. Second year of medicine. I learnt that if God created man in his own image, it was an almighty fuck up, and I wouldn't buy a used car off him. There's a couple of responses to that. First of all, Kevin G. Bacchus at Kevin BEACHUS. It took you that long? Dennis Lovell, have you read The Scars of Evolution by Elaine Morgan? It makes you realise what a complete bodge the human body is. Elaine Morgan is a very good writer, by the way. I do recommend reading her work. John comes back to that. 6 years of medical studies did it for me. Also a course on evolutionary biology from Stanford. Actually, evolutionary biology would do it. If you read a bit of evolutionary biology, you rapidly start to understand why our body is structured the way it is, and how that structure arose from an evolutionary process rather than just being put together in its final perfect form. Our bodies are not perfect. We have all sorts of redundant parts, relics from our evolutionary past. Our bodies are compromised. They are not divinely designed. As John says, if they are divinely designed, then the designer is not very good at design. There's no denying that. At EPBERG, question. If God created man in his own image, what image did God use to create a chimpanzee? Very good point. We do look kind of similar. Which is obviously explained by evolution by natural selection. Here is an answer that many people put forward in the Twitter feed. At voice of 6358964, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. I have seen no such evidence. I mean, that phrase, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, has been put forward by a number of people over the years, and it's hard to argue with. People often say to me, prove to me there is no God. No, it's not up to me to prove the non-existence of something. I don't believe that there is a green fluorescent flying turtle on the other side of the wall of my home. I don't believe there is one there. I don't have to prove there is no such flying entity behind the wall. I just realize that it's highly unlikely and there's no evidence of such a thing. And it's the same with God. It's not for the scientists to say and to prove that there is no God. It is for the religious to put forward evidence that there is a God, that a God does exist. If they provide evidence, I will look at the evidence, and if the evidence is faulty, I will see the holes in it, and it's always faulty. There simply is no evidence for God. It's not for the scientists to disprove the existence of something. It is for the religious to prove the existence of something. And no religious person has yet managed to do that. Blind faith, internal religious experiences do not count. Rob Hinks says the same thing a little bit more succinctly. So that's at Rob, H-I-N-X. No religion has satisfied the burden of proof. That's true. That's true. At Lenny Merrick 1, a perfect all-powerful deity creating flawed, mortal, insecure beings makes no sense. Flawed, mortal, insecure beings creating a perfect, all-powerful deity makes a lot of sense. It does indeed, to me at least, maybe not to you. I don't know, I let you be the judge of that, but to me that does make perfect sense. Flawed creatures create flawed ideas. Perfect creatures create perfect ideas. Religion is flawed. It is flawed, implying that it's perhaps us that created it. At J.A.C. Sinclair, happened to me while watching Robert Powell being crucified by the Romans in Jesus of Nazareth one Easter with my dad, who said, "Just a crowd of ruddy bully boys." Sounds trite, but it demystified the whole story for me. I realised without that, religion is nothing. I'm going to finish up with two final tweets, I think, and then I'll sum up. There are many, many more tweets. There were hundreds and hundreds of them, but I can't make this podcast any longer, really. I don't want to bore you guys. Hopefully I haven't already. Okay, so Cheech at the Cheech Man. I'm a Santa Clausian because if I'm good, every year I get presents. No one can prove Santa Claus does not exist. Why should my belief be any less valid than some fictional book written by a human? Why do three of the main religions come from one area? Alex Knight, at Alex Knight 68. Atheist here, simple reason. All those years of religious education and boring assemblies at school in the 70s and 80s. I think it's very amusing that some people in the USA think that school prayer will boost their particular version of Christianity. Okay, I think we've covered quite a lot of tweets. There's so many more I could go through. I literally had hundreds and hundreds of responses to my initial tweet. So I think one last tweet, and then I'll kind of summarize and leave you to contemplate this podcast. So this is from Julia Coleman at Hope Hospital. That is Cull, I-C-A-L. Science, not religion, explains the wonders and mysteries of universe. Also, religious texts in most cultures are misogynistic, homophobic, and racist. Proves nasty men created religions, not a deity. If God exists as published, he's not a club I want to be in, and he doesn't want me to. There are a couple of replies to that, basically agreeing with Julia. Okay, so I'm going to finish up now. I think most of my followers lean towards either the secular viewpoint or the humanistic approach to life. Although I have some religious followers too. I've tried to. I know this podcast may seem to have slanted ever so slightly in favour of the tweets from the non-religious, but that is purely because I had more responses from the non-religious than I did from the religious, which is why I've picked pretty much all of the of the responses from the religious community or from people of faith and read them out. Some of which were quite long, as you might recall from the beginning and middle of the podcast. It seems that people abandon religion for a variety of reasons, be it bad experiences as a child, the appearance and understanding of science in people's lives, or just the inconsistencies that are found in the various religious texts. And there's no denying it, each one of the religious texts has many, many inconsistencies. If you believe the word of any of those books, then you have to do some serious mental gymnastics, as the books constantly contradict themselves. But there were some good arguments, I think, from some of my religious followers or religious respondents, especially from the ones that had more of a deist approach. So the followers that believed in a god or a creator rather than the god or creator mentioned in one of the holy books. I suppose it's easier to have respect for that viewpoint, because if you believe in a creator, but you don't attach the various religious texts to that creator, then you can be a bit more logical about the reasons that creator might exist, and the reasons for which he created the universe. So yes, believing in a creator or a supernatural entity that created the universe, life, consciousness, the rest of it, I have some respect for that viewpoint. It's not a viewpoint I share, because it isn't based on any evidence, in my opinion. But I have more respect for that viewpoint than I do for the followers of individual religions such as Christianity or Islam or Judaism, or even Buddhism for that matter. Buddhism has always been the religion that chimes the most with me, because it does seem to rely to quite a large extent on a person finding their own meaning in life through processes such as meditation. But even Buddhism does have a belief in an afterlife, reincarnation, gods of the sort. So even Buddhism isn't something that I can get fully on board with. But it's one of the more peaceful of religions, I would say. And before anyone tweets me saying, what about Myanmar, and the atrocities basically that have have taken place in that part of the world under the auspices of Buddhism, well, yes, every religion seems to have at least one case of genocide associated with it, and Buddhism, it seems, is no exception, unfortunately. Which is why I take a atheist stroke humanistic approach to the world and to life. Okay, so the final thing that I want to say is really directed primarily towards the religious out there. First of all, I would like to say that I have no problem with any of you as individuals. It's not you that I have a problem with. It's organized religion. I don't care if an individual believes in an afterlife, or believes in angels, or believes in gods or goddesses. Any of those things, I have no problem with that whatsoever. If it's a personal faith that you keep to yourself, that is something that makes you feel better about life, then that's fine. That is absolutely fine. It's not the individual I have a problem with. It's organized religion. Christianity, Islam, all the other faiths, once they get to a stage where they have power, where there are big structures, especially when those structures are associated with the state, religion does some real damage. Just look at the Middle East. Look at the amount of people that suffer because of religion. If you're homosexual, if you're an atheist, if you believe in the wrong religion, if you're an apostate, you're in real trouble in many parts of the world. not just in the Middle East, under Islam, I should say, but in strict Christian nations too. There are real problems with atheists, there are real problems with homosexuals, etc., etc. And that's the issue. Religion has to get involved. It's not content just to be a guide. It has to dictate. And that's when harm is done. Whether it's terrorism, whether it's restrictive abortion laws in the US, whether it's the influence of religion in government that results in such technologies as stem cell research being restricted. Religion does real harm in society, and that's why I fight it. It's not because I'm a bigot or an Islamophobe or a Christianophobe or any of these things. That isn't why I fight religion. The reason I say what I do about religion on Twitter and in other places is because I think it causes harm. Our societies need to be more secular, more humanist. And by the way, I don't mean we should force that on people. No, I do not. I'm not talking about enforced atheism. What I'm saying is that for a society to function well, we need to educate our children from a young age. Teach them about religion, but not about one religion, about all religions equally. I teach them the history of those religions. Teach them the precepts of those religions. And teach them science and critical thinking so that they can look at them religions for themselves and realize for themselves that these religions simply aren't true. And if, after being exposed to many religions and science and critical thinking, individuals come out of it all thinking, actually, I do believe in that particular holy book, that particular god or goddess, then so be it, let them. But let's not encourage it. Certainly let's not legislate it. And let's not have faith schools. A faith school is just a method for brainwashing a child, and it is quite simply wrong. Okay, that said, I hope you have enjoyed this podcast. I know it's been a little bit more preachy than my podcasts usually are. Apologies for that. This is a subject that I have very strong opinions on, let's just say. If you would like to hear more from me, then you can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @MarkOfTheD. That's @MarkofTheD. There's also my website, scienceontheedge.com. If you'd like to make a donation to keep me making these podcasts, to encourage me and show that you actually enjoy my podcasts, then again, you can make a donation through my website, scienceontheedge.com. There is a donations tab within there. I'm trying to keep advertisements away from my podcast, and donations is probably the best way to do that. Okay, thank you very much for listening. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you and goodbye.